Well, we call you out, Hambini, BS on those handlebars. And that's what a lot of people are saying. And what this is all about, it's about Hambini's video he did on his new spanking Skylon time bike. Now, probably all of us would like him to be spanking someone else, but unfortunately the video was about his new bike, his spanking new bike. So Hambini was out showing his time bike, which he's been building up over some time. And as far as I'm aware, he's had this frame for some time. But what was the controversial part of this video was not the time bike, but was those lumps that we have on top of our STIs, or ergo powers, whatever you want to call them, depending on the brand. Well, anyway, let's roll that intro, guys, and let's have a talk about what is all this BS about. Well, what this is all about, it's about how he's saying that his time bike is better than a specialized SL7, and specifically the hoods on those STIs. Now, we know in those STIs, there's a number of different things that could be in there depending on what sort of group set it is. If it's a mechanical group set, it'll be the mechanisms and the cogs that turn and pull the cable to drive the two derailleurs, or it could be a hydraulic reservoir with the electronics to drive the Di2. And what we know is the disc brake versions and the Di2 versions are generally have a bigger hood. They have minimized the size a little bit, but generally they're bigger or fatter than the cable or rim brake counterparts, because they don't need to have that hydraulic reservoir, and that's what's taking quite a bit of space. So what Hambini was saying, he was saying that because that's on the top of the handlebars and that piece is bigger, that's having a huge aerodynamic effect on the bike, because those bigger pieces are causing more drag than, say, a one that was a rim brake bike that has a smaller hood and it's going to create less drag. And people are going, hey Hambini, that's BS. We don't swallow that one. We don't believe that one. Well, let's just have a look at that closely. And why is Hambini saying that?
Is the loss from the hoods. They are comparatively massive compared to the ones on the time and a semi-bluff body. So you get quite a big tip leakage on the top of the hood. That drag loss will depend on where you hold the handlebars too. If you are on the drops, then it is much worse. The aggravating effect here is the hoods are at the very front of the bike, so air that will be disturbed here will be first, so you'll get the maximum penalty. For example, if you were to carry a brick, you'd want to put that brick as close to your chest as possible and not out in front of the handlebars. The reason is, near your chest, the airspeed is locally less and the shape is absorbed into your body, so the drag penalty is severely diminished. You don't have that with the disc hoods because they're dangling out all the way in front of you.
Now, probably the first thing we need to understand is that if we look at it like in a wind tunnel, well, not a wind tunnel, let's just say it's a very still day and there's no wind, right? So the air is still, right? Now, when we move something through the air, what happens is that air needs to move. So because my hand or the bicycle is moving through the air. So as it moves through the air, it's pushing the air out of the way, and then the air turbulates behind that bike. So what we're getting is it takes energy. Because we're moving something, we're moving it, that creates a force, and every force has an equal opposite force, which is pushing on my hand, and that takes energy to push that forward. And we measure that in watts, because that's leverage times torque, and then we can calculate watts. So that's what we're talking about. It takes so many watts to push the bike at a certain speed through the air, or my hand through the air. It takes a certain amount of watts, because we can see air as a fluid, and the fluid needs to flow around my hand or that hood on the bike. Now, what we need to realize as well is when there's no wind and it's still, that air has to be moved. It's dead still, it has to be moved, and there's a certain amount of inertia in that, so it has to be pushed out of the way and pushed around the item. Now, the bigger that item is, the more air it needs to displace, and the more air it's pushing out of the way. Understand? It's just like water. It's the same thing. It can be called a fluid, just like water. So when we go and we displace it, the bigger the item is, the more of that fluid we're displacing. And that's what he's saying with these hoods. But I can get what people are saying. They're saying because the hoods are not very big and that's not making much difference, then how can that be? Now, when we look at volume, because they're rounder and they're higher, the actual area inside that hood is significantly more. And what makes it very, very important is it's at the front of the bike. Now, I know bike manufacturers like to sell us that we've got more aero derailleurs, we have aero seat posts, and so forth. But in reality, these make very, very little difference because the air has already been turbulated. And that's why in the triathlons, they put their water bottles behind their seat, because at that point, the air is so turbulated that the water bottle makes very little difference to the overall drag. But if we put the water bottle in front, like just we mounted it on the front of the handlebars, or we had one of those little bags on the front of the handlebars, that has a massive effect because that's where the still air is hitting the bike. So the front wheel and the forks and the handlebars and your hands and your body that are hitting the air are creating the most drag, because that's the items that are first hitting the air. Now, when we first hit the air, we need to take that air from 0 speed up to the speed of the bike as we displace it around our body. We're pushing it out of the way. Now, because that hood's bigger and it's right at the front of the bike, it's moving still air, it has a bigger impact than, say, if we put something like a water bottle behind the seat. And that's what Hambini's talking about. He's talking about because those areas on the front of the bike are creating more drag, and that displacement of air by those hoods is creating more drag. Now, even though overall in the total drag it'll be small, it's still less aerodynamic. And that's what he's trying to say. He's trying to say if you compare this bike, the time bike here, which is a rim brake bike, to a disc brake bike, he's saying that the time bike is more aero, not because the tubes are more aero or the front or the basic of the frame's more aero, but he's saying the things attached to the frame are more aero. Like your disc brake has a pumping action, plus it has a spinning action that is creating drag. Any spinning item has a lot of complications as when it's passing through air, as do the wheels. That's why having aero wheels makes such a big difference. And then we also have bigger hoods on the front, so we're pushing more air. And you know that we have handlebars that are like made really aero and thin, and triathlon bars. If it didn't make that much difference, then why would we go to this effort? And it's the same thing with even your cables. They produce a little bit more drag, but because the displacement of those cables that are in air at the front of the bike are very small, they're not displacing much air. Yes, they are putting turbulence, but as the item gets bigger and rounder, like your arm does, or like those hoods do, they're displacing significantly more air. So in conclusion, is Hambini right? Yes, he is right. But as he did briefly mention, it depends on the total drag of the bike, because what's happening is as you put your hands on the hood, you change the shape or the dynamic, the effect of the wind going around the hoods because your hands are behind them. But of course, when you've got your hands behind the hoods, your body is sitting higher on the body, creating more drag. So when you go to the drops, even though you're increasing the drag around the hoods, your overall drag, because your body will be in probably a more aero position, you've lowered your head, you lower your body, then your overall drag is going to be less and you're going to be more aerodynamic. But that's more about body position, not about the bike itself. So it's an interesting conversation, and I tend to lean on the side of Hambini. He's right, but of course, when we take the total drag of the bike and the body riding the bike, it may be not that big. Anyway, guys, that's where I'm going to leave it. Leave your comments down below. Do you think that making the hoods bigger is going to make a big difference? Do you think Hambini's right? Do you think Hambini's wrong? What's your take on it? Those hoods being a bit bigger for hydraulic systems? Let me know. Okay, guys, that's where I'm going to leave it. Remember to smash that like button. And if you haven't, it would really be appreciated if you subscribe on the channel. Cheers, and I will see you next vid.